Lilo and Stitch. In a far-off galaxy, an alien scientist named Jumba had created a strange creature named Experiment 626. Because 626 was always destroying things, he was being sent to a prison by the Grand Councilwoman. But 626 managed to escape. Now, 626 was headed for Earth. The Grand Councilwoman sent Jumba and Pleaky, another alien, on a mission to capture 626 and bring him back. Meanwhile, on Earth, a 5-year-old Hawaiian girl named Lilo was also on a mission. She was feeding a peanut butter sandwich to a fish named Pudge. Lilo thought it was very important to do this because she believed Pudge controlled the weather. Unfortunately, Lilo was now late for her hula dance lesson. Lilo rushed into her dance class, dripping water on the floor. Her classmates began to slip and slide. "Stop, stop!" cried the hula instructor. He asked Lilo why she was late and wet. The little girl tried to explain about Pudge. "You're crazy," said Myrtle, one of Lilo's classmates. Lilo pounced on Myrtle. The instructor quickly pulled them apart. The instructor called Lilo's sister, Nanny, to take Lilo home. Nanny was Lilo's only family, but when Nanny arrived, Lilo had already left. Nanny panicked because a social worker was arriving this afternoon to decide whether Lilo could continue to live with Nanny. But Lilo was already at home listening to Elvis Presley music. She was sad because none of her classmates wanted to be her friend. Lilo was so upset that she locked her sister out of the house. Nanny was still trying to get in when the social worker, Cobra Bubbles, arrived. Once inside, the visit went from bad to worse. Cobra told Nanny that she had 3 days to prove that she could take care of Lilo properly. Otherwise, Lilo would be taken away. Later that evening, Nanny and Lilo were talking in Lilo's room. Suddenly, something lit up in the sky. "A falling star?" Lilo shouted excitedly. She pushed Nanny out of the room. Lilo wanted to make a wish in private. But Nanny still listened as Lilo whispered, "It's me. Again. I need someone to be my friend. Maybe send an angel. The nicest angel you have." But what Lilo had really seen was 626 spaceship crashing into Earth. 626 stepped out of the smoking crater. He cackled with delight. He headed down a dark road, only to be run over by some trucks and knocked out. When he woke up the next morning, none the worse for wear. The indestructible 626 found he was in an animal rescue home. Before long, he realized that Jumba and Pleak were after him. That same morning, Nanny and Lilo went to Animal Rescue Center to the animal rescue home to find a pet. Nanny hoped it would cheer Lilo up. When Lilo came in, 626 tried to look as much as a dog as he could. Lilo was his only way to escape from Jumba and Pleaky, so he hugged Lilo and won her heart. "What is that thing?" Lilo cried when she saw 626. "A dog, I think," the rescue lady answered nervously, despite Nanny's protests. Lilo adopted her new quote-unquote dog and named him Stitch. Meanwhile, Jumba and Pleaky were watching as Nanny and Lilo left with Stitch. Jumba wanted to capture 626 right away, but Pleaky reminded his partner that they could not be seen. "We have to blend in," Pleaky told him. After Nanny left for work, Lilo tried to teach Stitch to fetch, but Stitch was not interested in being trained. Lilo ended up fetching for Stitch instead. Then, Lilo bought two snow cones. Stitch ended up dumping his on the head of a small dog. Stitch was not exactly what Lilo had expected. Dressed like tourists, Jumba and Pleaky were nearby watching Stitch. They were waiting for their chance to capture him. Later that day, Lilo and Stitch sat in the restaurant where Nanny worked. Lilo finished drawing in her sketchbook and held it up to Stitch. "This is a you," she told him. This is your badness level. It's unusually high for someone your size. We need to fix that. Jumbo and Pleaky were also sitting in the restaurant. They lured Stitch over to their table. While Jumbo grabbed Stitch and tried to place his alien handcuffs on the creature, Stitch opened his mouth wide and swallowed Pleaky's head. Nanny had to dump a pitcher of iced tea on Stitch to make him let go. When the restaurant owner found out that Stitch belonged to Nanny, he pointed to the door. "This is not working out," he told Nanny. Nanny and Lilo took Stitch home. "This is a great home. You'll like it a lot," Lilo told Stitch. She gave him a pillow so he could sleep on the floor. Stitch shredded the pillow. Then he went to the kitchen, where he made another mess. Nanny had enough. She grabbed Stitch, saying, "We have to take him back. He was an orphan, and we adopted him," said Lilo. "What about Ohana?" Nanny stopped. Their father had taught him about Ohana. "Ohana means family," Lilo continued. "Family means nobody gets left behind or forgotten." I know, Nanny said, sighing. Stitch jumped up from Nanny's arms, and he and Lilo went into Lilo's room. Stitch climbed onto Lilo's bed and found a photograph on her family under the pillow. "Be careful of that," Lilo warned. The picture was all she had left of her father and mother. She snatched it back and slipped the precious photo back under her pillow. So Stitch amused himself with other things in Lilo's room. He built a model city and then destroyed it. In the middle of the night, Stitch woke Lilo and showed her a picture in the book he had found. "That's the ugly duckling," Lilo yawned. "See, he's sad because he's all alone and nobody wants him." Lilo pointed to another page. "And on this page, his family hears him crying and they find him. He is happy because he knows where he belongs." Stitch took the book and crawled into the bed Lilo had made for him. While Nanny tried to get a job at the coffee shop, Lilo continued with Stitch's lessons. "Number 2, Elvis plays the guitar," she said as she handed Stitch a ukulele. But when Stitch played the instrument, the piercing high notes shattered glass. Nanny didn't get that job either. Finally, as Nanny tried to get a job as a lifeguard, Lilo and Stitch prepared for his last lessons. "Time to bring all together," she told him. Stitch began to play his ukulele. Tourists began to crowd around him and take pictures, but their camera flashes upset Stitch, who caused the commotion. Nanny, once again, did not get the job. Everything had gone wrong. The unhappy sisters sat down on the beach. David, a friend of Nanny, saw them. To cheer them up, David suggested they all go surfing. The group headed for the waves. Once she began to surf, Nanny forgot about all of her troubles. Stitch clapped his paws, and David and Lilo laughed as they enjoyed the waves. For a little while, everyone was happy. But as Nanny, Lilo, and Stitch rode a large wave, Jumba sneaked up behind him. Jumba grabbed Stitch and pulled him under the water. Desperate, Stitch grabbed Lilo and began dragging her down. David and Nanny pulled the Lilo to safety, never noticing the aliens. Stitch finally won his struggle with Pleaky and Jumba, but he was exhausted. Luckily, David went back and rescued Stitch. Back on the beach, Nanny frantically checked to make sure Lilo was okay. Nanny looked up to see Cobra Bubbles watching. He had seen the whole thing. Nanny asked David to watch Lilo. Then Cobra quietly told Nanny that although he knew she was trying, it was time for a more suitable home for Lilo. The next morning, a very unhappy Grand Councilwoman fired Pleaky and Jumba, but Jumba was pleased. Now he could capture Stitch his way. Soon, Jumba found Stitch in the forest. Stitch didn't run, but he wouldn't go with Jumba either. "Waiting," Stitch told Jumba. "For what?" Jumba asked impatiently. "Family," replied Stitch. "They're built to destroy. You can never belong," Jumba said. Stitch dropped the book and ran. Meanwhile, Lilo joined Nanny in the kitchen for breakfast. Stitch left, Lilo murmured sadly. Nanny comforted Lilo. Now it'd be harder to tell Lilo that they would be living apart. But suddenly, David burst in saying, I think I found you a job. This is Nanny's last chance to keep Lilo. She rushed out with David, telling Lilo to stay inside and not let anyone in. At the same time, Stitch was racing to Lilo's house with Jumba, following close behind. Stitch slipped through the dog door. Jumba crashed through the front door, frightened. Lilo called Cobra Bubbles. Aliens are attacking my house. They want my dog. Jumba and Stitch fought so hard that they destroyed the house. Meanwhile, Nanny got the job at the general store down the street. As she left, a fire engine shrieked past. Fearing the worst, Nanny raced home. Cobra Bubbles was already there. Lilo was in his car. Nanny begged Cobra not to take Lilo from her. Cobra just pointed to the ruined house and shook his head. Lilo watched as the two argued. Then she slipped out of the car into the forest. Stitch followed her. Stitch quickly found Lilo. Wanting to apologize, he handed Lilo her scorched family photo, which she had managed to save. But Lilo was angry at Stitch. You ruined everything, she shouted. Lost for words, Stitch transformed himself into his alien form. Lilo finally understood. You're one of them? At that moment, an alien named Captain Gontu appeared. He had been sent by the Grand Councilwoman to capture Stitch. He snared at both Stitch and Lilo and carried them to his spaceship. Stitch escaped, but before he could free Lilo, Gantu's ship took off. By the time Nanny arrived, she was too late. She watched as the spaceship carrying her sister disappeared into the sky. Luckily, Stitch convinced Jumba and Pleaky to help him rescue Lilo. Soon, Nanny and the three aliens were in the Jumba's spaceship battling Captain Gantu. After a wild chase, Stitch was able to free Lilo. Jumba landed his spaceship on the waves behind David, who was surfing. David gave them all a ride on his surfboard, though it took a few trips. But their troubles were not over. Cobra Bubbles was waiting on the beach for Lilo, and the alien troops were waiting for Stitch. The Grand Councilwoman ordered the troops to place Stitch on her ship. Stitch asked if he could say goodbye to Lilo. The Councilwoman was shocked. This is my family, Stitch exclaimed. I found it all on my own. It's a little unbroken, but it's still good. Then, Lilo showed Stitch adoption papers to the Grand Councilwoman. A stickler for rules, she agreed to let Stitch stay on Earth with Lilo, and Cobra decided Lilo could stay with the nanny. Jumba and Pleaky stayed on Earth too. Along with David and Cobra Bubbles, they became part of Lilo's new family, where no one ever gets left behind.